Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Emily Carter spent the last 12 years of her life climbing step by step in a career that few believed she could maintain after so many losses. Since her parents' turbulent divorce back when she was still a teenager, she learned to sustain her own faith in things. She was stubborn, focused, dedicated to the point of forgetting birthdays, holidays, and weekends. Working became the way to protect herself from the pains that insisted on lingering around. And it was like this, between increasingly ambitious interior design projects and awards that featured her name in architecture magazines, that she believed she had won, until she met Daniel Reeves. He appeared at a time when Emily no longer remembered what it felt like to truly rest. Daniel seemed to bring balance. Intelligent, successful, with a sharp sense of humor and that kind of look that makes you feel unique. Within a few months, they were living together. And in less than 2 years, they were already talking about marriage. Emily, who had always been skeptical about happily ever after, found herself wrapped up in a promise of future that seemed for the first time reliable. She had found someone with whom she could share her life, and that comforted her more than any award or contract. But just 11 days before the wedding, when the flowers were already ordered, the invitations sent, and the honeymoon paid for, Emily discovered that Daniel had been having an affair with a co-worker for months. The betrayal wasn't just a broken trust. It was an internal earthquake. She questioned everything, her criteria, her instincts, her ability to recognize true love. She felt ashamed with friends, family, and even with herself. She felt ridiculous for believing so much, for defending someone who lied so easily. She decided to leave Chicago without looking back. Not on impulse, but because she realized that if she stayed, she would spend the next few years stuck in memories that hurt. Seattle seemed far enough, different enough. There she started over, bought a small apartment, reorganized her portfolio, and dove into work. This time with more strategy and less urgency. But fate, as always, likes to play with time. And it was during an art exhibition, which she almost decided not to attend, that she met Ryan Mitchell. It was Linda who introduced them. She had been a client of Emily's in an interior design project months earlier and insisted that she go to the event. Said she wanted to introduce her to her nephew, a prize-winning landscape architect who was passing through Seattle for a lecture. Emily, still hurt and cautious, went only out of politeness. But Ryan was different from any man she had ever met. He had a way of listening with genuine attention. He spoke about plants as if he were speaking about people. He was involved in sustainability and urban reforestation projects. But what caught her attention most was his genuine enthusiasm when he talked about each of these works. There was something serene about him, something that contrasted with the intensity of Daniel. The connection between them was so spontaneous that before they even realized it, they were exchanging messages every day. They began meeting frequently, casual lunches that turned into long dinners. He showed her the behind the scenes of his park projects, and she took him to see the interiors she designed. In 3 months, they were living together, and it was exactly on the day their time together reached that mark that Ryan surprised her with an old ring from his family. He said he wanted to share not just a house, but life with her. Emily, with tears in her eyes, said yes without hesitation. Over the years they built something solid. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. They shared breakfast in silence on busy days and talked for hours when they had time. They argued when they disagreed, but learned to give in. They traveled less than they would have liked, but managed to turn even a trip to the grocery store into something light. Emily felt that she had finally found a home with him. She could breathe. Ryan respected her space, encouraged her ideas, participated in her achievements. There were no demands for attention, just genuine presence, and that was enough. In recent times, she had considered the idea of having children. She began to see the future as something safe, not as a tight trope. Her work was going well. Clients were increasing, the projects becoming more challenging, and with Ryan by her side, she felt at peace even on the hardest days. Their love wasn't loud, but it was firm. And it was this firmness that supported her when she received the call from the hospital informing her that her father had fallen at home and fractured his femur. Surgery was unavoidable, and he would need care for at least several weeks. Emily packed her bags in a few hours and boarded a flight to Chicago. She left Ryan with the promise that she would return as soon as her father was stable. There was no tension between them. He hugged her, kissed her forehead, and said it would be okay. She believed him. But there are things that even the most mature love can't predict. And sometimes what seems buried long ago finds a way to resurface exactly where we least want to return. Emily's plan was to stay in Chicago for 2 weeks, maybe 3, just the time necessary to help her father recover from surgery. She was determined to keep everything under control: medications, appointments, physical therapy, diet. Meanwhile, she remained connected with Ryan, exchanging messages and video calls almost every day. He asked about her father, made jokes to make her smile, and said he was counting the days until she returned. Even from afar, his presence was constant, and Emily felt supported. But the days kept passing, and she began to realize that things were more complicated than she had expected. Her father, as stubborn as ever, refused to follow some medical advice. The hired caregivers didn't last more than a week, and she ended up accumulating roles that drained her body and mind. It was during one of those trips to the pharmacy while waiting for a medicine to be picked up that she heard a familiar voice. She looked aside almost unwillingly, and there was Daniel. His face thinner, his eyes dull, his beard unshaven. He saw her too, and for a moment both remained silent, trying to understand if that encounter was real. He was the first to speak with a strange smile, saying that he was trying to recover, that it had been months since he quit his job, that the days had been too hard to count. Emily didn't know what to say immediately. She felt anger and pity at the same time. The last image she had of him was that of a man who destroyed her dreams, and now standing in front of her, he seemed only a broken reflection of what he once was. They talked for a few minutes. She said she was in the city because of her father. He mentioned that he had been attending some support meetings. Before parting ways, Daniel asked if they could have coffee sometime without ulterior motives. Emily hesitated but said yes, and days later she ended up accepting. It was quick, informal. He told her that he was living alone, that his relationship with his parents had broken down after the layoff, and that the addiction had started as an escape until it became a hole from which he couldn't get out. She listened in silence. She didn't judge nor justify. She simply listened. In the following days, the coffees repeated. Emily didn't tell Ryan anything about these meetings. At first, she believed it was unnecessary to bring this subject into the marriage. It was just temporary support, an act of humanity. But slowly, something inside her began to change. Daniel no longer seemed like the villain of the story. A genuine remorse began to emerge in his words. A tired man trying, albeit in an unstable way, to fight against his own ghosts. And she let herself be drawn into this attempt at redemption. It was her idea to search for a rehabilitation center with intensive support. She researched options, scheduled interviews, accompanied visits, and finally convinced him to check in. When he finally accepted, she got emotional. She felt like she was in some way closing a cycle with dignity. Daniel was admitted. The clinic was known for its results and the work was serious. Emily visited him frequently, helped with exercises, dynamics, and moments of emotional instability. She was a constant presence, and he recognized this with gratitude. The professionals at the clinic saw her as an essential support in the process. And despite everything they had gone through in the past, Emily dedicated herself sincerely. She told herself that there were no ulterior motives, that she was there as a friend, as someone who understood the other person's pain. But it only took observing the looks between the two of them to notice that there was more than empathy. On the anniversary of her marriage to Ryan, she woke up early, helped her father with his routine, and headed toward the clinic. She didn't inform Ryan about the visit. In her mind, a call at the end of the day would be enough to compensate. She brought some books, snacks, and spent a large part of the afternoon chatting with Daniel. He was more cheerful, said he had dreamed of a time when the two of them were still together, free of the mistakes that destroyed the past. Emily smiled without knowing how to respond. At one point, he cried. He said he didn't feel worthy of having been loved by her. That despite all he caused, he still remembered the way she used to look at him. She leaned closer, placed her hand over his, and hugged him. A long hug loaded with memories, regrets, silent forgiveness. A hug that wasn't just an act of support. It was a goodbye to everything that once existed between them, and that for a second seemed to want to revive. What Emily never imagined was that Ryan had decided to surprise her on that day. He boarded early, thinking about how special it would be to show up unexpectedly on their wedding anniversary, even from a distance. He called her father, wanting to know if it would be okay to do a quick visit, but said it would be a surprise. Her father answered politely, but said that Emily wasn't there, that she had left early to visit a friend hospitalized in a rehabilitation clinic. That was what she had told him. Ryan, curious, asked which clinic it was, saying he wanted to personally deliver the flowers to brighten her afternoon. Without suspecting anything, her father gave him the address. Ryan thanked him, excited about the idea of an intimate, beautiful, meaningful moment. When he arrived at the clinic, he went to the reception, but before being announced, he stopped in front of the slightly open door of the visiting room. Inside, he saw Emily hugging Daniel, eyes closed, her face resting on his chest in an intimacy that said everything. For a few seconds, time seemed suspended. Ryan felt his heart sink. That scene left no room for doubt. The woman he loved so much was there, involved in a past that should have remained buried. Emily noticed Ryan's presence when she pulled away from the embrace. Their eyes met. She tried to stand up, tried to say something, but he had already understood everything. Whatever she said at that moment wouldn't have the power to erase the image he saw. She only said that it wasn't what it seemed. He took a deep breath, looked at her for a few seconds, and turned his back. He left without making a scene, without demanding explanations. He understood that silence carried answers harder than any word. And with a broken heart, he decided it was time to leave. Ryan didn't say anything. He just observed that scene long enough to understand everything. The hug between Emily and Daniel didn't seem like a farewell, nor a gesture of compassion. It was full of feeling, unresolved history. With his stomach twisted and his heart clenched, Ryan left there without saying a single word. He went to the parking lot, got into the rented car, and remained there for a few moments, staring at nothing. He held the flowers on his lap as if still wanting to believe that it was a mistake. But he already knew it wasn't. He started the car, put it in gear, and began to drive away. Emily appeared at the entrance of the parking lot at the exact moment he was maneuvering to leave. Upon seeing her, she ran to the car, signaling for him to stop. He rolled down the window. She approached, ready to say something, perhaps explain. But before any word was spoken, Ryan threw the bouquet on the ground between them with a firm expression of someone who had already decided everything. Then he accelerated without looking back. Upon arriving at the airport, there was no ticket booked, but he didn't care. He bought the first available one and boarded a few hours later without even thinking if anyone would notice his disappearance. During the flight, he tried to sleep, but the image kept coming back. Emily, with her eyes closed, her face pressed against Daniel's chest. It was a scene that spoke louder than any justification. Upon arrival at home, it was already late, and he didn't turn on the lights. He walked to the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase, and began packing his clothes calmly, like someone accepting a silent defeat. He didn't knock anything over. He just carefully arranged each piece as if closing a cycle with dignity. He went to the living room, took the box of memories they had kept together since the beginning of the relationship, movie tickets, cards for special dates, some developed photos. He put everything inside the suitcase without allowing himself to hesitate. He separated the documents, valuable items, and belongings he had brought from his previous house. He emptied the shelves, took his books, and removed the photo frame from the shelf. He didn't want to write a letter or leave a note. He emailed his lawyer requesting the start of the divorce process and told him he would leave the key with the concierge. He wouldn't wait for confrontations. For him, everything was already clear. Hours later, the apartment was clean, quiet, and empty of any trace of him. Ryan went down, handed the key to the concierge, and asked that it be passed on to Emily. He said only that she would know the reason. He left without looking back. He went directly to his childhood friend's house where he would stay until deciding what to do with the shared assets and legal responsibilities. He didn't talk to Linda, nor did he reply to messages. The only thing he did was cancel the flight she would use to return to Seattle a few days later. He wanted to make sure they wouldn't be under the same roof again. Emily returned home the next day completely distressed. She had called Ryan several times since the previous evening, sent messages, and even tried to contact Linda, but nobody answered. His phone was off, and the silence on the other side only increased her anxiety. She took the first flight in the morning, hoping to find him and explain everything, even though she didn't know where to begin. Upon opening the apartment door, she felt a void that didn't need explanation. His absence was in everything. She went straight to the entry table. His keys weren't there anymore. She called for him, walked through the rooms, and nothing. She opened the closet with trembling hands, and felt the world spin when she saw the empty shelves. His clothes were gone. She went to the bathroom, opened the cabinet, and only her products remained. His space and the mirror clean. The watch he always left on the nightstand also gone. There was no doubt left. Ryan had left. And apparently he had no intention of returning. The next day, she stood in the middle of the living room, still processing the emptiness. When she received a call from an unknown number, she answered with hope. From the other line, a formal voice introduced itself as Ryan's lawyer and informed objectively that the divorce process was being initiated. Emily fell silent, holding the phone to her ear as if not hearing right. When the call ended, she sat on the couch, feeling the weight of the words. Formal request for divorce. She didn't need further explanations. That confirmed everything. She tried calling Ryan again, sent messages, wrote an email. No response. She looked for Linda, who also didn't know anything. It was as if he had disappeared from the map. And in that absolute silence, she understood that he had left in a way she never imagined, without return, without discussion, without drama, only with the certainty of someone who had seen enough to not want to come back. Emily spent the following days in denial. She walked through the house as if he might still return, as if suddenly the sound of a key in the door might interrupt that silent nightmare. She waited for any sign, any message, any action indicating regret from his side. Nothing happened. The days dragged on between frustrated attempts at contact and sleepless nights where every memory felt like a knife being driven in again. The photos of the couple were still on her phone. The daily habit still seemed linked to him, like preparing 2 cups of coffee without realizing it. Her body was in the present, but her mind insisted on living within what had been ripped away. Without direction, she took a flight back to Chicago. She thought that being away from their house, away from the walls that witnessed the fall of what had once been solid, might help calm her chest. It didn't help, especially when she reunited with Daniel at the clinic. He was still in treatment with a slightly better appearance. He showed progress. He said he felt more centered, that the therapy sessions were affecting him in a profound way. Emily got involved again in that reality, this time fully. She surrendered to the care, to constant presence. She believed that if she had already lost her husband, at least she could help someone recover. With time, the meetings became closer. Daniel seemed another man. He made a point of thanking her for everything, showed real interest in her life, in the pains she carried. The intimacy between them grew, and even with all the open wounds, she began to believe that perhaps the chapter with him hadn't ended the way she always imagined. She accepted his invitation to rent a small apartment together. She told herself it was for practicality, for economy, since he had no one else to rely on, and she still spent part of her days by his side. Deep down, she wished that gesture also meant redemption, that the man who had destroyed her dreams in the past would be able to build something new beside her. She was tired of starting over alone. She wanted to be loved again, wanted to believe that the effort wasn't in vain. And when she received that very week the official confirmation of her divorce with Ryan, she felt that it closed a cycle forever. The paper was signed, sealed, definitive. Around the same time, Daniel was released from rehab. The doctor said he had shown significant progress and that with emotional support and discipline, he could move forward. Without hesitation, they decided to live together again. Emily believed that this time would be different. In the first few months, Daniel seemed truly transformed. He cooked meals beside her, kept his post-treatment appointments, showed interest in the projects she resumed as a freelancer. He said he felt lucky to have a second chance, and she clung to that. Slowly, she let go of suspicion, pain, fear of being betrayed by her own hope. She began to imagine a possible life beside him without idealizing, but with some relief at seeing signs of stability. For the first time in a long time, she didn't wake up crying. She was reorganizing her life and trying in her own way to turn the past into a starting point. Until one Wednesday night, Daniel informed her that he would go out for dinner with an old colleague from his support group. Emily didn't question it. He seemed stable, had been keeping his appointments, and she wanted to believe that trust was part of the rebuilding. As the hours passed, his phone stopped responding. By 2 a.m., the line went straight to voicemail. She tried not to create catastrophic scenarios, but the unease prevented her from sleeping. The next morning, while deciding whether to call the clinic or try to reach some of his contacts, the phone rang. She answered, expecting to hear Daniel's voice, but from the other side came a woman speaking quickly and directly. She introduced herself as Natalie, his ex-girlfriend. She was calling from Daniel's own phone and informed that he was unconscious and they were in a motel in the northern area. She said they had spent the night together and that at some point he had acted strangely, confused, mixing alcohol with medication. She explained that before losing consciousness entirely, Daniel had murmured something about Emily being a trustworthy friend, someone who would know what to do. Natalie then asked as if it were the most natural thing in the world, "Can you come pick him up here?" The question echoed like a blow. Emily froze, holding the phone with trembling hands, feeling the world collapse once again, just like always. Emily didn't think twice. She hailed a taxi and went directly to the motel. During the ride, her heart raced and her head swirled with unanswered questions. When she arrived, she found Natalie at the reception, tense, holding Daniel's phone in her hands. They went upstairs together to the room. The scene was devastating. He was disoriented, slurring his speech with a lost look. With Natalie's help, they managed to dress him and place him in the back seat of the car and took him to the nearest hospital. Emily held his head during the ride, trying to maintain control of the situation while forcing herself not to break down right there. At the hospital, while waiting for the appointment, Natalie casually remarked that it was good Emily had come since she seemed a very close friend. At that moment, Emily corrected firmly, but without changing her tone. She said she wasn't a friend. She was his current girlfriend. Natalie remained silent for a few seconds, visibly unsettled. She said she didn't know that Daniel had omitted that. She looked at the floor, avoided eye contact, and without saying anything else, left the hospital. Emily didn't try to stop her. She stayed there alone at the reception, tasting the bitter flavor of humiliation. The man she had tried to save once again was there unconscious after a relapse alongside his ex, as if the months of effort and hope had been merely a pause between two falls. And once again she was the one holding the pieces. She spent a few days in silence, just breathing. She thought of Ryan often, imagined where he was, if he still remembered her. If he knew that everything had collapsed again. She wanted to tell him that she had tried, that what she did was out of compassion, that she never intended to betray. She wanted to explain what he saw at that clinic, what that moment really meant. But it was too late. He had disappeared like someone who understood that his love wasn't enough to hold her there. Nevertheless, she wrote a letter by hand, 3 pages. She told everything. Apologized for exposing him to doubt. Apologized for not being clear. For letting the emotions of the past create cracks in a marriage that deserves protection. She said she still loved him, that no one at any time occupied the space that was his. She posted the letter without knowing if the address was still the same. Waited 1 day, 2, a week, no response, not an email, not a returned envelope, nothing. And it was in this silence that she truly understood that the end no longer depended on her. That some choices don't have a comeback. Even when the remorse is sincere, that time doesn't freeze for those who make mistakes and then regret them. It moves on. It takes along the love that wasn't cared for in the right time. Emily remained in Chicago, starting over once again. This time without Daniel, without Ryan, without plans, just with the bitter lesson that by trying to save someone who insisted on destroying themselves, she had lost the one who had truly been whole by her side. And what hurt the most wasn't the loneliness that remained. It was realizing that she had in her hands the chance to be happy and she let it slip away trying to fix the past. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.